This is the Sci-Fi Griot. I'm your host, Nicholas Cunningham. In the last episode, we asked a question that science fiction returns to again and again. After a sacrifice is made, can we go back? Can we return to who we were before the line was crossed, before the exception was justified, before the compromise felt necessary? But today I want us to move forward, not past that question, but deeper into it. Because sometimes the crisis ends, the invasion is stopped, the war is won, the system survives, and yet nothing really goes back to normal. Instead, we adjust, we adapt, we tell ourselves that what we did was unfortunate but necessary. And slowly, almost without noticing, we learn how to live with it. That's what today is about. Not the moment of compromise, but the life that follows it. Compromise doesn't usually arrive as a dramatic failure of character, it arrives as relief. Relief that the danger passed, relief that people are safe, relief that stability returned. And in that relief, we stop examining the cost. Science fiction understands this psychological moment very well. In Battlestar Galactica, when the fleet survives another essential threat, there's often a collective exhale. People are exhausted. They want normalcy. They want routine. They want to stop living in crisis mode. And so decisions made under extreme pressures aren't revisited. Martial law doesn't feel urgent anymore, but it also doesn't feel worth undoing. Surveillance no longer feels intrusive, it feels protective. Secrecy doesn't feel dangerous, it feels stabilizing. This is how compromise embeds itself, not through force, but through fatigue. People don't defend the compromise, they simply stop resisting it. And science fiction keep warning us when people stop asking why, systems stop justifying how. One of the most chilling ideas in science fiction is the transformation of exception into infrastructure. In Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there's an organization called Section 31. It exists because Starfleet decides its ideals were vulnerable. So rather than abandoning those ideas publicly, they outsource moral compromise privately. Section 31 becomes the place where ethics can be suspended, rules can be bypassed, harm can be rationalized. And what makes this terrifying is that Section 31 exists is that most of Starfleet pretend that it doesn't. This allowed the institution to claim moral purity while benefiting from immoral outcomes. That's not corruption by chaos, that's corruption by design. Science fiction uses this structure again and again because it mirrors real life systems. When compromise is hidden, accountability dissolves. When harm is outsourced, no one feels responsible. And eventually, the exception stops being exceptional, it becomes necessary. Efficiency is one of the most seductive justification in science fiction because efficiency sounds reasonable. In the show The Expanse, the belt isn't oppressed through overt cruelty. It's exploited because exploitation is efficient. Resources flow upward, labor flows outward. Suffering is normalized because the system functions without an interruption. No single villain orchestrates this. The system simply rewards outcome. And that's the warning. When efficiency becomes the highest value, human beings become variables. Science fiction keep asking us, what happens when a system works better when some people are ignored? And more importantly, how long before ignoring people becomes policy? Science fiction doesn't fear collapse as much as it fears normalization. In Westworld, the part violence is not shocking because it's extreme. It's shocking because it's routine. Suffering is acceptable because it's contained. Ethics are dismissed because the victims are labeled artificial. Accountability disappears because profits are high. And slowly, the characters stop asking whether it's wrong. They only ask whether it's sustainable. That's the shift science fiction warns us about. The moment when morality is no longer debated, only managed. Normalization doesn't feel like loss, feels like adaptation. And adaptation is how compromise survives. Living with compromise doesn't feel dramatic, it feels bureaucratic. It shows up as a policy language, as meeting minutes, as procedures no one remembers approving. In Babylon 5, after the fall of the Altarian rule on Earth, the show doesn't end. It asks even harder questions. Who gets the power now? What system remains? Which behaviors were learned and internalized? Because overthrowing oppression is easier than dismantling its habits. Science fiction insists on this truth. If you don't actively repair after compromise, you institutionalize it. And institutions remember compromises long after people forget the reasons. One of the most uncomfortable questions science fiction asks is, who benefits from our willingness to adjust? Because compromise is rarely experienced equally. Some people experience it as inconvenience, others experience it as erasure. In in Elysium, the future is technologically advanced, but access is restricted. The system works beautifully for some and brutally for others. And the system doesn't even apologize, it simply functions. Science fiction reminds us when compromise becomes normal, it costs are distributed unevenly. And those at the margins pay first and the longest. Once people adapt to compromise, returning feel disruptive. People say, why we open old wounds? Or why destabilize something that works? Or why question decision that kept us alive? Science fiction answered gently but firmly because stability built on unexamined loss is fragile. In Children of Men, society has adapted to despair. The world functions barely, but hope has been removed. And without hope, survival becomes hollow. You can't go back to innocence, but you can choose whether loss defines your future. Science fiction doesn't always show revolutions. Sometimes it shows remembrance, remembering what was lost, remembering who paid the cost, remembering what was promised would be temporary. But in this sense, forgetting is how compromise completes its work. And remembrance is how humanity reasserts itself, not through rebellion, but through refusal to accept harm as normal. So, what does it mean to live with the compromise? It means recognizing that survival is not the same as justice. It means deciding whether adaptation is acceptance. It means asking a question that science fiction refuses to let go. Who is paying the price so that others can feel safe? That's where we're headed next. Because once compromise become normal, the cause doesn't disappear. It simply shifts. This has been the Sci-Fi Griot, a place to slow down, to reflect, and to imagine carefully.